Flamingo turned the Russian city of Oryol into a living hell. The occupiers tried to sneak into the Sumy region through pipelines. The Ukrainian armed forces met them at the exits. The US is recognizing Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, while the UK is preparing new sanctions on the transportation of Russian gas. A unique drone wall will strengthen air defense operations in a few weeks. Ukrainian electronic warfare operators have figured out how to shoot down Kinzhal missiles with the help of Bandera. The controversial Colonel Manko assures that the situation in Zaporizhzhia is under control. Meanwhile, the military and analysts are less optimistic. Putin wants to capture all of Ukraine in 3 stages. However, he no longer knows where to find money for the war. This year alone, the Russian budget will fall short by $37 billion oil dollars. My name is Yana Kocherova, and now the main news from Ukraine and around the world. The sky was on fire in Russia's Oryol. Debris from the downed aerial target fell right among residential buildings. Local Telegram channels report that the city was attacked by Ukrainian Flamingo cruise missiles. Russian air defense opened fire right above the rooftops, so the explosions and debris frightened residents in several districts.
Well, in the early morning, they made the decision. Yes, they decided to go ahead and shoot some things down just as they had planned. Oh, there goes another one right over there.
The enemy tried to get into Sumy through the pipelines. In the Sumy region, Ukrainian soldiers destroyed a group of Russian saboteurs who tried to infiltrate the rear through the underground utility system. According to the armed forces of Ukraine, the occupiers attempted to break through using pipes, taking advantage of underground passages for a surprise attack. However, Ukrainian forces were prepared for such a scenario. The sabotage group was met with heavy fire. Some of the invaders were eliminated, while the rest tried to survive under the sights of Ukrainian soldiers. The battle continued under the control of our defenders. In the Huliaipole direction, the situation is under control and Russian troops have made no gains. This statement was made by Colonel Serhiy Manko. He released a new video address in which he assured that the situation is more or less normal and nothing out of the ordinary is happening there.
We have stopped the enemy in that direction. Fighting is ongoing. The battles are, of course, still taking place for Solodke, for Uspenivka, for Rivnopillia.
However, according to open sources, some of the settlements that Manko named as being under the control of Ukrainian forces have in fact already ended up behind enemy lines. In reality, things are not as positive as Manko claims. Ukrainian troops in the Zaporizhzhia direction have withdrawn from Rivnopillia to more advantageous positions. This was reported by the Southern Defense Forces. The fighting in the region does not subside. Russian forces continue heavy shelling and assaults in the areas of Privilne, Zeleny High, Pavlivka, Vorone, Stepove, Novopavlivske, and Rivnopillia. Late in the evening of November 11th, our units came under a powerful fire strike, after which, in order to preserve the lives of the soldiers, Ukrainian forces withdrew to more advantageous positions. At the same time, the enemy was stopped. The advance of Russian troops has been halted. Actions to block and inflict fire damage on them are ongoing. Deep state analysts positively assess the decision of the Ukrainian command to withdraw troops from Rivnopillia in order to save the lives of the soldiers. However, they draw attention to problems with communication between different structures.
Here we are now having this discussion because the Ukrainian population, Ukrainian society, and all of us in general have always consistently insisted that the need to withdraw from positions that are being lost is in fact normal. And right now we are most concerned about the lives of our soldiers.
Unfortunately, according to Deep State, Russian forces continue their offensive in the Zaporizhzhia region, and after the loss of Rivnopillia, the village of Solodke is now also under threat. Analysts note that the enemy is increasing its infantry forces, trying to put pressure on Ukrainian positions and take advantage of gaps in the defense. After the capture of Rivnopillia, the occupiers gained operational space toward Huliaipole from the north. However, for now, they do not have the resources for a large-scale offensive on the city, according to Deep State experts.
Rivnopillia is already critical for Huliaipole as it opens up operational space for the northern part of the city where the enemy can advance. Of course, they will bring in infantry there, using this settlement as a kind of logistical hub for amassing forces and for movement. Of course, enemy pilots will definitely move in there and they will work more actively against Huliaipole itself, most likely focusing on logistics. Therefore, it is quite possible that from Rivnopillia, the enemy may continue their advance toward Varvarivka.
We will tell you in detail in the report what is happening in other directions and how Ukrainian defenders are managing to hold back the enemy.
Russian troops in Mad Max style are invading the ruined Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk. It was with this headline that an article about the situation around this city in Donbas was published on the Reuters news outlet.
Moscow claims that capturing Pokrovsk, which Russian media call the gateway to Donetsk, will allow it to advance north toward the two largest cities still under Ukrainian control in Donetsk region, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk.
Russia has been trying to take Pokrovsk for over a year now. At first, there were attempts to encircle the city and cut off logistics in order to threaten supply lines. Now the tactic is infiltration and the buildup of small units within the city. But time passes and the city still stands.
According to Putin's orders, Pokrovsk and Munich were supposed to be taken sometime at the end of last year, probably in December 2024. Well, now a year has passed. They still haven't been taken, although the situation there is very serious.
In the command of the air assault forces, they note that the occupier is trying to infiltrate the city in small groups using the fog. The Russian army has been using infiltration tactics for more than a week now.
In recent days, the Russians have intensified their efforts to penetrate Pokrovsk using light vehicles through the southern outskirts. To do this, the enemy has taken advantage of unfavorable weather conditions, particularly dense fog. This reduces the effectiveness of our aerial reconnaissance and strikes in open areas. Currently, there are more than 300 Russians in the city. Their objective remains unchanged, to reach the northern boundaries of Pokrovsk and then attempt to encircle the agglomeration. The 7th Air Assault Corps.
According to Ukrainian intelligence, the next deadlines for the capture of Pokrovsk are set for December 15th and for Kupiansk by the end of the year. The enemy is probing Ukrainian defenses along almost the entire front line to find spots for new offensives. Now, it's the Zaporizhzhia direction.
Russia has also stepped up its activity in the Novopavlivka direction. In this sector, the enemy has made advances over the past few months. And now the enemy is trying to stretch our defensive line along the front, advancing not only in the Pokrovsk direction around Pokrovsk and Minorad, but also attempting to expand offensive actions in the Novopavlivka sector, essentially towards Zaporizhzhia region and Dnipropetrovsk region.
In the Zaporizhzhia direction, using the fog as cover, the occupying army captured 3 settlements. This was stated by Commander-in-Chief Sikorski.
The situation has significantly worsened in the Oleksandrivka and Huliaipole directions, where the enemy, taking advantage of its numerical superiority in forces and resources, advanced during fierce fighting and captured 3 settlements. Oleksandr Sirsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Ukrainian defenders were forced to withdraw from Rivnopillia in the Zaporizhzhia region to more advantageous positions in order to preserve as many of their soldiers' lives as possible. The enemy, in its attempts to advance, is suffering enormous losses, and just in the past day, the armed forces of Ukraine eliminated 58 Russian soldiers in this direction, with about 30 more wounded.
As a result of comprehensive fire strikes on our positions in the area of Rivnopillia, in order to preserve the lives of personnel, Ukrainian units relocated to more advantageous positions. The enemy's advance has been stopped. Actions to block and comprehensively strike the enemy are ongoing. Fierce fighting also continues in other sectors along the line of contact in these directions. The defense forces of southern Ukraine.
Approximately 500 to 600 shellings, using up to a total of 2,000 munitions. As a result of this fire impact, all positions and all shelters in some settlements were effectively destroyed or ruined. The enemy is now trying to bring in consolidation groups, but the defense forces are striking them and preventing them from gaining a foothold in these settlements.
The armed forces of Ukraine continue to inflict significant losses on the enemy in manpower and equipment, while simultaneously destroying its offensive potential in rear areas.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski speaks sharply and without diplomatic courtesies. He is convinced that if Putin managed to capture Ukraine, Poland would be next. We would rather eat grass than become a Russian colony again, Sikorski remarked. He reminds us that Polish history already knows how Russian guardianship ends. That is why Warsaw has consistently allocated 2% of its GDP to defense for 20 years, and now it is already 4.7%. And the Polish people fully agree with this. People understand why this is necessary and they do not protest, says Sikorski. My colleague, the Minister of Finance, when European colleagues ask how we can afford such expenses, jokes, if I didn't do this, they'd just tear me apart. The diplomat believes that Ukraine is preparing for another 3 years of war, although colonial wars usually drag on for decades. But according to Sikorski, Putin is unlikely to last even these 3 years.
We, on our part, are preparing to provide Ukraine with the resources to resist during this period by using frozen Russian assets. Ukraine is already producing almost half of its drones and cruise missiles on its own. Putin turned out to be weaker than we thought. We believed he had the second strongest army in the world, and he himself was convinced that it would all end with a coup, a walk in the park, a 3-day operation. And now, for more than 10 years, he is still fighting in Donbass. It's hard to call that a victory.
The United States of America will significantly increase its military support for Ukraine in order to inflict even greater damage on Putin's war machine and to isolate him even more strictly. This was stated by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham during a Zoom call between American lawmakers and the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. The Americans plan to significantly increase pressure on the aggressor by the end of the year and at the beginning of 2026. To this end, legislative initiatives have already been developed that are intended to literally crush the Russian economy. This includes, in particular, a bill that designates Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism under American law.
If we are able to successfully pass this bill, which designates Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism under American law, it will make its economy essentially radioactive and untouchable.
At the same time, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that the United States has practically exhausted its options for imposing new sanctions against Russia. According to him, the next stage of pressure will focus on strengthening the enforcement of existing restrictions, particularly in combating the so-called shadow fleet that Moscow uses to circumvent the oil embargo.
Well, on our side, there aren't that many sanctions left to impose. I mean, we've already hit their largest oil companies, which is what everyone was asking for. Obviously, this needs to be implemented, and it will take some time before the effects become noticeable.
The United Kingdom is preparing to ban maritime services for the transportation of Russian liquefied gas. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, this step will become another lever of pressure on the aggressor and will force the Kremlin to pay for the war. We expect all these measures to be implemented as soon as possible, the head of state emphasized. The government of the United Kingdom, led by Prime Minister Keir Starmer, has also announced the continuation of humanitarian and energy support for Ukraine, as well as the allocation of a new package of energy assistance.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
For the first time since the start of the full-scale war, there has been a significant decline in the extraction and processing of Russian oil. As a result, the Russian budget will lose at least $37 billion in oil and gas revenues in 2025, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky reported after a meeting with intelligence leaders. According to him, Russian oil companies and the entire energy sector have already lost tens of billions of dollars. And this directly weakens the Kremlin's war machine. Both international sanctions and our long-range Ukrainian strikes are working effectively, the head of state emphasized. According to Zelensky, the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kirill Budanov, reported on Russian plans for the first half of next year. For its part, Ukraine is monitoring Kremlin connections in key regions of the world and is actively restricting them. Peace talks with Russia have effectively reached a dead end this year and are currently suspended, Ukraine's first deputy foreign minister Serhiy Kyslytsya told The Times in a comment. According to him, in the summer, Kyiv tried to mobilize international partners to help encourage Putin to agree to a personal meeting with President Zelensky. But these efforts did not yield any noticeable results. In a dictatorship, it is impossible to hold meaningful negotiations with teams representing the dictator. Kyslytsya explains that they have a strict mandate, cannot deviate from the set line, and constantly monitor and report to each other on how firmly they held their positions. That is why, in the Russian system, you can only talk directly to the dictator himself. Meanwhile, it seems that Putin has no intention of stopping. And now he wants to seize not just a few regions. Next, more about the plans of the aggressor country.
In addition to the regions already occupied, the Russians want to take Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, and Odessa regions from Ukraine. And analysts at Foreign Affairs believe that 2026 could be decisive. Vladimir Putin will pursue his goal in 3 stages.
If Russia holds on to the 4 regions it has already annexed and adds Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, and Odessa, which would effectively cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea under such circumstances. The Kremlin will look for opportunities for a truce, hoping to move on to the second phase of using economic pressure and political warfare, backed by the threat of a new invasion in order to impose control over Kyiv. In the third stage, Russia plans to absorb Ukraine and include it in its sphere of influence, similar to Belarus.
To be honest, read this provision. I immediately recalled Medinsky's words, which were said at one of the meetings with the Ukrainian delegates with representatives of Ukraine about how, gentlemen, you could lose 3 more regions. It is well known that such sentiments, such plans really do exist in the Kremlin. This is important because today, as Jack Watling writes again, the West mainly, including Europe, not to mention the United States, is primarily focused on the issue of security guarantees for Ukraine, on issues related to the demilitarized zone, the deployment of troops on Ukrainian territory, peacekeeping forces on Ukrainian territory, and so on. The territorial issue is being discussed, but this refers to various options for dividing these 3 regions, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. In fact, according to the author, this diverts valuable attention, depletes or exhausts resources, and clouds the understanding of what really will happen at the front over the next year, at the very least. The point is that President Vladimir Putin is currently not yet ready for any kind of ceasefire until not only those regions that are already at least partially under occupation, but also 3 new regions are under occupation.
Europe's indecisiveness, Donald Trump's flirting with the Kremlin, and the focus on China, all of this only encourages the Russian dictator. It's not easy for Russia, but it stands its ground. According to analysts' forecasts, bringing down this colossus with feet of clay will require a set of measures, a painful blow to the shadow fleet and the oil industry of the aggressor country, as well as more weapons and improved training for Ukrainian recruits. Thank you. Analysts note that one of Ukraine's main problems today is an insufficient number of infantry.
The problem lies not so much in a lack of people, but in the quality of training and the ability to integrate infantrymen into combat brigades. Today, more people are serving in the Ukrainian army than ever before. But the army does not have the capacity to train enough soldiers to perform frontline duties. To address this problem, Ukraine's new army corps needs to implement brigade rotations and allow better trained units to assist in training weaker ones.
Ukrainian analysts have long pointed out that one of the reasons for the Russians' success near Pokrovsk is the insufficient number of infantry. In some positions, soldiers have to endure extremely harsh conditions, facing constant enemy attacks and shelling for 100 days or more. And although recently the focus has been on Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, the gray zone is rapidly expanding in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia directions. The threat of occupation looms over Huliaipole.
A rather serious and formidable Russian armada is currently approaching, and in general, if truly serious and decisive measures are not taken in response, and if the defensive structures, the defensive fortifications and protective structures around, well, actually it's a heavily fortified area. More than that, it's not just a simple settlement, but rather a strategically important and well-defended location, then the consequences could be significant. If it is really well built, thank you. Well, then there is a certain chance that the plans of the Russian generals will not be fulfilled. But if not, then the story of Vuhledar, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and unfortunately Pokrovsk may repeat itself. If, and again, this requires a responsible approach, these incidents that are happening there are directly related to the article we discussed, which is about the occupation of the Zaporizhzhia region. And the capture of Zaporizhzhia by Russian forces is considered one of the strategic objectives of the upcoming campaign, the campaign of the coming year. Indeed, Huliaipole is one of the important, I would say, key points in the defense system of the Zaporizhzhia region, If the situation develops according to an unfavorable scenario, the Russians could establish some kind of bridgehead possibly within the next week. A bridgehead for launching an offensive next year.
This winter, British analysts note, could prove decisive. To a large extent, the success of the Russians will also depend on the mood of the Ukrainians. With Bandera against Kinzhals missiles, British military analyst David Axe spoke about an unexpectedly effective way to counter Russian missiles. Ukrainian electronic warfare operators have figured out how to shoot down Kinzhals missiles by spoofing their navigation signals, sometimes to the tune of the patriotic anthem, Our Father Bandera. The Kinzhals remains one of the most dangerous missiles in Moscow's arsenal. It reaches speeds of about 5.7 Mach, flies at high altitudes, and carries a powerful warhead over hundreds of kilometers. Because of this, even Patriot systems sometimes fail to intercept these missiles in time. Ukrainian soldiers have found a way to protect peaceful Ukrainian cities. According to its operators, one of the electronic warfare systems, Lima IW, is now effective against Kinzhals. The Night Watch unit doesn't just jam the missiles, it substitutes satellite signals, providing non-standard information that causes a navigation error. In theory, any random signal would do, but the soldiers deliberately chose a melody to make a symbolic gesture against propaganda, and judging by the reports, it works. In the past 2 weeks, about a dozen cases of Kinzhals missiles deviating have been recorded. One of the latest photos allegedly shows such a missile deviation near Starokostiantynivy. Ukraine is getting its first ever drone wall. Ukraine is preparing to deploy a unique drone wall to defend against Russian attacks. This was reported by Business Insider, citing on condition of anonymity the founder of the company that created the system. The wall is essentially an aerial minefield made up of dozens of small drones. A trade has already sent it to Ukraine. Full deployment will take several weeks. At first, the wall will protect cities and the energy sector from Russian kamikaze attack drones. Later, it will move closer to the front to shoot down guided aerial bombs, which are almost impossible to intercept. NATO is closely monitoring Russian threats. In March 2025, innovative competitions were organized for Ukrainian and Western companies. They were looking for anti-drone solutions. The TRAD, with its drone wall, made it to the finals. Radars detect the threat. First-person view drones take off from launch platforms, carry small explosives, form layers in the sky to create a barrier, and detonate near enemy devices. The threat is neutralized and the debris falls. The Ukrainian cruise missile FP5 Flamingo, more powerful than the Tomahawk, doesn't just copy the American Tomahawk, it surpasses it in range, explosive power, and operational freedom. The British publication The Independent revealed details about this weapon, which makes Kiev independent from the Allied red light. The Flamingo can fly up to 3,000 kilometers at a maximum speed of 900 kilometers per hour and carries over a ton of explosives. More details about Ukrainian weaponry. Self-propelled artillery, mortars, drones, electronic warfare, shells, ammunition, communication systems, air defense, missiles. Ukraine is actively ramping up the production of its own military equipment and ammunition. Production is becoming increasingly precise, large-scale, and technologically advanced.
During this war, Ukraine has already reached the point where almost 60% of the weapons we have are in the hands of our soldiers. This is Ukrainian weaponry. This is powerful weaponry with many cutting-edge features.
This is no longer just a simple local industry. Ukraine is building its own military technological shield, a network of production lines, testing grounds, and combat units that turn ideas into weaponry. And our specialists immediately test them in real conditions.
The Ukrainian side is scaling up precisely medium-range weapons with a range of over 1,000 kilometers.
Let's start with drones and that small yet decisive technology that, in an instant, changed the rules of war.
The series of strike platforms from the FP family and other Ukrainian models are not produced according to the principle of fast, cheap, effective. Their advantages are the simplicity of their design, speed of production, and the relevance of their tactics. They make it possible to carry out precision strikes, disrupt enemy logistics, and keep enemy positions under pressure far from the front line. In
2024, about 1 million units were contracted, and by 2025, their output had grown to 30,000 FPV drones per month. It should be noted that this quantity, meaning the annual production of FPV drones, about 4 million units, is a record figure. Even when taking into account the capabilities of the military-industrial complexes of all NATO countries combined. In other words, at this moment, the Ukrainian Ukroboronprom is producing an unprecedented number of unmanned aerial vehicles. For comparison, the US Army replenishes its own arsenal with unmanned aerial vehicles at a rate of about 100,000 per year. Let me emphasize again, the Ukrainian defense industry is producing up to 4 million drones.
The technological and manufacturing recipe is simple. Composite fuselages, 3D printed wings, inexpensive components, and open source navigation solutions. All of this makes it possible to produce operational platforms in batches. But you can't cut costs on electronics. Navigation and guidance systems make the drones resistant to Russian electronic warfare. Otherwise, mass waves of launches won't break through the enemy's dense defenses. In parallel with drones, a strategic direction is also developing. Here, the key players are missiles and missile systems that strike the enemy's rear, destroying their fuel, depots, and command centers. Neptune is a domestically produced anti-ship and coastal missile system. It has strengthened the security of maritime borders and given Kyiv tools to influence the logistics of adversaries in the Black Sea.
This is an unprecedented event in world history. Ukraine, as a country that essentially does not possess a military naval fleet, dealt a heavy blow to its enemy, the Russian Federation, by destroying up to 35% of the Black Sea fleet in a single moment. According to British sources, the naval activity of the Russian Federation in the Black Sea Basin as a result of the use of strike drones and, accordingly, naval drones has decreased to a historic minimum.
Another important milestone is the FPV-5 Flamingo cruise missile. This is a completely Ukrainian development with a stated range of up to 3,000 kilometers.
For comparison, the legendary American Tomahawk has a strike range of 1,600 kilometers. The Tomahawk's warhead is about 500 kilograms, while the Flamingo's warhead is about 1,150 kilograms. The most recent documented use of the Flamingo was a strike on an oil terminal, the terminal in Tuapse. Moreover, Russian public channels themselves confirmed that the Ukrainian side used these means of destruction.
By combining small drones and large cruise missiles, Ukraine gains both scale and strategy. Drones keep the enemy on edge, missiles strike critical targets, and together this seriously undermines the enemy's ability to wage a prolonged war. But the Ukrainian defense industry is not just about small and large systems. These are also time-tested developments like Bohdan, Stugna, and other artillery and anti-tank systems that provide mobility, firepower, resilience, and operate within a unified strike network. Drone reconnaissance, artillery adjustment, precision missile strike. And so the cycle repeats.
Drone reconnaissance gathers vital real-time intelligence, which is then used for accurate artillery adjustment to improve targeting. Following this, precision missile strikes are carried out to effectively neutralize identified threats, and so the cycle repeats. And adjustments are being made to the reality on the Ukrainian side, specifically the use of strike drones and storage, namely referring to Flamingo and Neptune, at the moment of neutralizing the Russian oil refinery complex. According to the Russian side's assessment, the losses from the recent Ukrainian strikes on the Russian oil refinery complex are estimated at around $100 billion.
Ukraine's production capabilities are already extending beyond its borders. Under agreements and joint projects, Ukrainian companies are localizing assembly and serial production in European countries. If before the full-scale war, Ukraine's defense industry was lagging behind, by 2024 production volumes had reached about $9 billion, and in 2025 they grew to $35 billion. Plans for 2026 include scaling up to $60 billion. And this is just the beginning. That's all the news for now. I wish you a quiet, peaceful day without enemy attacks. See you soon.